I'm just coming up from being downstairs with my kids who are watching how to paint, how to draw, something. And I'm sitting with my stack of paintings, just reflecting on the time where I used to go through tutorials. Even though my kids are under 7 years old, I see and feel all of that frustration. Mommy, it's not going this way. Mommy, this is not working out. And somehow I remember a time where I used to say these things to myself in my head. If you have been watercoloring for a while, following tutorials, noticing that despite showing up, there isn't as much improvement as you're hoping. Imagine trying to learn to play the piano by memorizing songs. You could follow along, hitting the right note, but if someone took the music sheet away from you, could you actually play? Real musicians don't just memorize songs. They understand how the notes fit together so that they can create music of their own. Now, painting works the same way. That's why you often feel stuck when you paint without a tutorial. You have learned the notes, but not how to put the notes together to create your own music. Today, I want to invite you to a live replay session where I'm going to be talking to you about a 5-stage roadmap that teaches you how to put everything together so you can finally paint with more confidence without needing the music sheet to guide your every brushstroke. Most artists don't need more tutorials. In fact, what they need is more clarity, and this is why the 5-stage roadmap is such an important element that I use with my artists with Brush Movement Collective. Today's video, I want to guide you through my exact process from stage 1 all the way to 5 as I create this composition. You will not only learn how I paint this, but also understand the techniques, the reasoning, and rationale behind all of the different steps. This live session is unedited and in real time, and I want you to walk away with understanding what stage you are at and where you should be focusing on depending on the stage of experience in watercolor. This 5-step roadmap is unique to Brush Movement Collective and is exactly how I've designed and crafted classes for artists so that every artist from different levels will get to experience success classes pegged right at their level. So if you're ready, get your brushes, your paints, and supplies because the ones that really find the most growth are the doers and not the ones that are just watching. Today, what we're going to be covering is I just want to talk to you about the different skills that are involved when we paint loose florals. Now, I want to know in the chat, first thing, how many of you guys painted something else other than loose florals before you joined this watercolor journey? Put it down in the chat. Like, I don't know, maybe you might have painted landscapes, or I saw someone did food illustration, so fun. It makes me so hungry watching all of those stuff. But, you know, it could be anything. So put it down in the chat. And also, if you have not, I would love for you to just share where you're coming from. What time is it there? Because the fun thing is being able to see you guys. There is like different lightings. Some of you have a bit more light than others. And here in Singapore, it's 9 p.m. My kids are sleeping next door. So can't talk too loud, but we'll try our best. But you guys can hear me. That's the next thing I want to make sure. Yes? Am I clear? Okay, very good. I see a lot of thumbs up, which is awesome. So Gisela says shopfront illustration and simple landscapes, painted portraits, butterflies, mixed media, and abstract. Oh my, so fun. Landscapes and cute illustrations. You know, there was once upon a time I did think about cute illustrations. But then I could not after a while. Like, it was just too cute for me because there's too much details. I like to use big brushes and things like that. I couldn't do the small brushes. So that was me. Hillary said landscape person. So I'm very excited to see because, you know, the thing about learning watercolor is that I always feel like when you master how the medium works, you can basically paint any medium. You could translate it into pet portraits, into landscapes, and so on. The only difference, of course, is the type of brushes that you're going to use, you know, and how you actually control the timing and the paint and water ratio. You know, like take for instance landscapes. You're going to need a lot bigger brushes for all of those big broad strokes. You're going to have to move in a certain way because of the water bead. So there's so many different things around watercolor that when you are familiar with, you can translate it into any subject. But here's the thing about loose florals that's very, very tricky. I always feel that loose florals feel or they look a lot easier than it's actually done. And it's almost like a scam because it looks so effortless and easy, but really when you try it yourself, it becomes like a huge blob. So speaking of that, this is where I wanted to break down the journey for you as a loose floral artist to share with you the 5 stages that you should go through to help you to identify the skills that actually matter at each stage. At the same time, at each stage, I'm also going to talk about the common difficulties that artists have at that stage. So let me just share with you how this 5-stage thing came about. Now, when it comes to learning to paint watercolor, when I first started, I went onto YouTube and I looked at the thumbnails. That's how I searched for the videos that I wanted to try out. I would essentially look at that thumbnail and go, yes, that's a beautiful painting. I'm going to try it. And I don't care what the title says, but it's usually how to paint blah, right? So I'm going to click it and I'm going to check it out. And what happens is that I realized that this person that is teaching me how to paint this is actually in stage 4 or 5, the wizard stage. And me, I'm basically at stage 1 and I'm struggling with every single thing this person is telling me, even though she's making it so effortless. And the interesting thing is that, my dad, he also learned watercolor 2 years ago when I opened Brush Movement Collective. He's also a member. But anyway, it's quite funny because sometimes he shares his paintings on Discord. I don't know if any of you guys know this. But anyway, he has always told me this, like, Jillian, I cannot do your videos. Like, you make it so effortless. It's so hard. Like, and that's the thing. Like, that's the big misconception with loose florals because it feels like such a scam. It looks effortless, but it's the hardest type of floral or, type of painting to do because it comes with flow and it comes with timing. It also comes with planning, which does not look that way when you watch time-lapse videos. It always looks like da-da-da-da-da, done. And so that's why this 5-stage thing came about for me. And today I'm going to break it down for you. We're going to start with stage 1. Now, each of these stages, I've given them cute names. And the reason why I love cute names is because it makes it more relatable. And, if I call it stage 1, stage 2, blah, it's so technical and we're not going to do that. So in stage 1, I like to call them the curious. And I always feel like stage 1 is a good base to continue staying at because everyone should be curious. You should always be at stage 1. It's almost like a home base, right? And stage 1 is the stage where you have just recently discovered watercolor. And I want to know how many of you guys have gone through the Facebook group and have seen the artist passage and have taken the artist passage. I just want to know, just put it down in the chat because this is actually how it relates to the artist passage. And then if you have, put down in the chat to let me know what stage you are at, right? Stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. And stage 1 is the curious, and then of course with each stage it starts to build up. Now today I am going to be starting my painting and I am going to just share my other camera, my setup, and also let you know what I'm going to be using just in case you're curious so that it doesn't appear all over the chat while I'm painting and people are asking me what I'm using. So we're going to start with that. And in my setup today, I have got my sketchbook. So I've been loving this sketchbook of late. It is by Saunders Waterford. I actually got it in Japan. I can't find it in Singapore. And the thing is, I suspect it's like Saunders Waterford paper, which I love. And they have just binded it into a book. That's brilliant. Actually, this is where you can actually just take your favorite paper and go to the binder and get it binded, ring binded, instead of doing all the gluing stuff that's happening on YouTube. But let's see that make things simple for our practice, right? So we are going to start off with our stage 1, and these are the skills that a stage 1 artist needs to focus on. The common problem when it comes to stage 1 is that they always feel like their marks look very stiff and also hesitant. So I have got my reference photo with me, so make sure you have that reference with you. Nicole has kindly shared the reference in the chat, but maybe Nicole, you can share it once again. And I just want to let you know, if you have not painted from a reference before, take a deep breath and you can do it. What we're doing is we are just going to capture shapes. And stage 1, we're using our brush to capture big shapes. We're not going to go into details and all of that. And then in that moment at stage 1, I will also show you how we are going to be working with skills like wet in wet, charging and adding in water. So these are things that we're going to do in stage 1. Now, stage 1, your focal point is really on getting your brush work down. And what I mean is you want to, as you can see, I'm doing my brush work really slowly and deliberately. While it's still wet, I'm just going to add in some nice dark pigment. Don't be afraid of picking up color when you are painting. And in the reference, we're not going to paint everything. We're just going to pick and choose. Today, you are the chef and you are going to decide what are some of the parts of the reference that you really want to capture. So you can see I've just created these petals, and how I did it is I'm holding my brush far away, we're pushing it down, and then we're getting some of these, right? And I have also injected in some color. You can see the bleeds happen because we are doing wet in wet. So this here is actually wet in wet. And you take the opportunity to see whether or not your paper is drying or if it's still wet. This is a good opportunity for you to think about it. Don't be afraid of leaving out white spaces too. They are your best friend, because if we fill out the whole sheet, you won't be able to get it back. So we've got that top half. And now, like I said, we're just going to capture the overall shape of this flower. I'm pressing it down and I'm pushing it towards it. And you see, when I push it towards this part here, which was previously still wet, it's going to bleed. And this is where at stage 1, the curious artist, you are learning, or at least discovering, that when it comes to painting, you're going to see that water and paint and your brush interacts with each other, and that's how you actually get your brush strokes. Now remember to use the full potential of your brush. These create big strokes, and then with a round brush, you can get some of your small strokes. Now while it's still wet here, I want to take the opportunity to just drop in some yellow, and that is my wet in wet right there, right? So when our stage 1 artists say that they get stiff and hesitant strokes, this is often because when they are creating the overall shape of these florals, they tend to be very hesitant. You create some of those dabbing little marks. We don't want the dabbing little marks. Let me just give you an example. This, we don't want this. Okay? Because you're holding it like a pencil, and we want to hold it like a brush. So remember to use your brush like a brush. And now I'm going to create another flower here, and we are just creating that first layer. And I want you to pay attention to how every time I move towards the flower, I'm always curving it in, and I'm flicking it in the direction where the center of the flower is. And that's it. That is basically the strategy. Don't be afraid of picking up color. Now my brush is just loaded with a lot of pigment. And with all of this pigment, I am just going to be adding in a big stroke over here. And you can see it has that contrast. And I just wanted you to remember, based on what you are seeing here, I haven't used many strokes. So the more minimal strokes you have, the better, because we are letting the brush basically create all of these marks. And this is what we need to focus on at stage 2. Now we're going to build our composition here. And I am just going to be painting, different florals that I'm seeing in the page. And as you can see, I was hoping that this orange bleed into the yellow, but it dried a lot sooner than I wanted, so that's fine. I'm going to add in a warm yellow instead. And again, use big broad strokes. And sometimes discount details and use the space that's given to you on your paper. Curve all your marks. And I don't rest my wrists on the paper. Throughout this time, I always make sure that my paper is, my wrist is kind of like lifted or flying. I don't really have it down. So there we have it. We have 3 flowers now. Okay, and this is stage 1. It's not just stage 1 in terms of like stage 1 of the painting, but stage 1 of the skills that we are building. And what I want artists to do at stage 1 is also being able to look at big shapes. Making marks is one, but being able to capture big shapes. Now, the big brush, I always recommend that you take a brush that is at least bigger than size 10. The brush that you choose is probably going to impact how much paint and water you can hold too. And this is where it brings us into stage 2, water control. So what we have done so far is actually wet in wet. I'm just seeing if anyone is paying attention because I just said something wrong. No, we're not doing wet in wet, but everyone's in the zone. So anyway, what we've been doing so far is wet in dry. And that is stage 1, right? We've just been putting paint to paper. That's how everyone starts. And stage 2 is now going to be wet in wet. We're going to focus a bit more on water control. And this is the part where sometimes the problem comes around where people feel like, oh, everything just gets into one color, or it feels very flat, or we feel like, oh, everything looks very flat here, there is no variation, and this is where the amount of water in your brush becomes really important. I'm just going to do a short demonstration what I mean here. Now, earlier on, I did those dabbing marks that you saw, right? And as you can see, I didn't adjust my paint and water ratio. It is actually all rather same in consistency. Now, if my brush is very, very wet, what happens is that now you can see it's quite wet, right? So you can see that sheen. Even if I were to dip my brush in water and try and lighten the value when everything is very wet, what happens is that these guys start to swim rapidly into here, and I'm gonna let it dry because when we come back into it, this entire shape is going to be just one shape. And many of us wonder, why is it that I tried to lighten this stroke, but it did not dry lightened? And that's because the amount of water you have on your brush is way too much or way too saturated in just water. And as a result, it pulled all the pigment that was already here into here. So then while it's still wet, there's a lot of things happening. When it's drying up, the pigment is kind of getting pushed to each other. So we're just going to leave that one to dry. We'll come back and check in on that. But let's do some wet in wet now. So this is the fun part. I love wet in wet. And I'm going to pick a giant brush, which my kids have stolen. No, I found it. So we're just going to take a giant brush, and what I want to do is I'm going to wet parts of the painting. Okay, so I just want you to see, we're just going to do wet in wet just around parts of this painting. And this is going to help you to see that sometimes wet in wet does not have to be wetting the whole paper as we did in day 2, because we were only doing one flower there. So if you've checked out day 2's video, we actually did wet in wet for the entire paper, and then we painted that flower wet in wet. Now we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to do it in sections. And you're going to see the contrast between flowers that are wet in dry and wet in wet. That contrast is so fun because you really get to see the difference in edges when you are painting. So let me just go back into my reference. And I want to, this time, add in color that is slightly more purple. And I want to have it here. And you can see that straight away there is movement. It's just going to flow. And when you are managing wet in wet, one of the things that I want to warn you is you need to allow your paints to move. Don't try and control it and bring it back to where it's supposed to be. Let it move and let it dry in whatever way it is moving towards. Okay, so I've just put down two shapes there, basically two flowers, and I'm totally aware that it's moving. I'm just going to let it do the work. And in stage 2, we are not only trying to gain more knowledge on water control, we are also learning about timing, because timing is going to teach you about whether or not I should use a specific amount of paint and water ratio. And as we know, there are different amounts of paint and water ratio, and this depends on how much water you have on your brush, right? If you have a very light color, then obviously you have a lot more water compared to paint. And if you dab off the excess water and you take your pigment, the same color can have different value just because of how much water you have on your brush. Now, keeping in mind that timing, when I talked about timing, I'm actually referring to what stage your paper is drying at. And this is something that I feel was missing in my practice when I started, and I got stuck in stage 1 for a very, very long time because I didn't know that water control was more than just, charging in paints and letting it bleed and things like that. But we wanted to also think about, creating different types of edges. So in stage 2, this is where my artists in Brush Movement Collective, they get access to From Blobs to Blooms, where I share with them the different stages in which your paper is drying and the types of paint and water ratio. And then to force them, okay, not force them, but they're willingly doing it, but to help them to apply the skills over and over again, each month I always make sure that we have a segment where we would have water involved, always. And members who are scared of water, they can choose to avoid it or they can choose to face their fears. So I think it's super fun. But at this stage, my paper here has dried. And I want to add in a
Hey,
couple
Jillian,
of
just a
leaves.
time check. It's 25 after the hour.
All right. Thank you.
Welcome.
So I'm going to add some leaves now because you see, we have already blocked out the big shapes, right? And this is where we are entering stage 3. So in stage 3, what we want to do is we're trying to push contrast and depth. Because you see, when you're in stage 1 and 2, one of the things that many artists work on in the beginning is they kind of learn how to set the stage, that first beginning layer. And then when you get to stage 3, after understanding how watercolor works, the properties, whether it's color or your brush control, paint and water ratio, all of this, we want to start focusing on depth. And that's where we are going to add layers. Now this here looks like a very, very flat shape. And we're going to see how we can bring out specific petals. We're going to try and, glaze over color. So we're going to do some of these things. And what you're doing in stage 3 is that you're trying to create a composition where there is going to be a foreground and a background. You're creating a push and pull. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to define your focal point. These guys, because they have got such blur edges, it's pretty obvious that they are background figures or co-stars. And they are not going to get the main Golden Globe Awards here, but we are going to also add in leaves and other elements that could add to this painting as well. Now I'm noticing that at stage 3, you're also a bit more comfortable with color mixing. So one of the things that I always encourage members to do is to mix your own greens. And that's where you get your yellows and you play around with whatever green, whatever blue that you have. This way you get familiar with how to actually create different greens. And the fun thing is that, especially if you're into granulating colors, we were talking about this in our last live Q&A. A lot of blues actually have granulating properties, which allows you to get granulating greens without having to buy a new tube of granulating green color. So we are going to now add in a couple of greens, and using my brush, I'm just going to be making marks. You don't have to paint every single green. What you need to do is you just want to kind of point out direction. You're using lines, and we're actually tapping a little bit into stage 4 as well, because stage 4 is actually about composition. At stage 4, you are also starting to, think about how your paintings should look in terms of mood. So I'm using the tip of my brush right now just to do the stamens of some of the flowers. And, you don't have to highlight every single one. You just want to get a gist of it. Now the green that I had put down before, I feel like it's so bright. So we're going to adjust it a little just to change things up. And while you are adding in your leaves, I want you to think about areas where you can kind of go around, so then it looks like the leaves are peeking out a little bit. Because right now we are at stage 3 and we are playing around with creating more depth. And part of creating depth is also, like I said, the background and the foreground. As you can see, I'm working on the background right now. Okay, so we're adding in some leaf shapes, and I want my florals to be standing out. So I'm going to make sure that my leaves are kind of hiding behind. We don't have to paint leaf shapes in leaf shape forms. Sometimes it's also nice to just be grabbing color and then dabbing a mark down. And that kind of gives you a different kind of mood or atmosphere in your painting. You're showcasing that there are different sizes because size matters throughout your composition. If you want to show depth, we want to remember that the elements that are at the back should be smaller and further away, while the ones in the middle should be a little bit tighter and more crowded. So I hope that you guys are still here with me, slowly making your way through your own composition.
Yeah, and I put in the chat that they can use the react button and to raise their hand, or if they just had a question to go ahead and unmute and ask. So
yeah, so feel free to ask questions if you have any, because this is the opportunity for you to kind of learn what else you need to master maybe at different stages. So depending on what stage you're at, right? So now we're talking about stage 3 where we're creating depth. And I think it's honestly one of my favorite stages because you get to really play around with layers. So I'm just gonna make this guy a little bit more vibrant, and I'm gonna add in a couple of layers here. And I want you to notice that the layers that I'm adding, I'm mainly using different parts of my brush. Sometimes the tip, sometimes the just a little bit here, which is a big one, right? And the whole point is to just showcase where you think the shadows are going to be hanging out at. Now with that orange there, we can always go with a lighter color value version of orange on this side. And you don't have to add shadows everywhere. Your shadows are meant to enhance areas in your painting and not hide them. So you see, when I started adding layers, when I was at stage 1, so it was like adding layers before I was ready to do, what I was doing was I was hiding layers. I was just hiding stuff that I didn't like to see. I was going like, oh, there's a big overworked bloom. I'm just going to put some more paint on it just to make sure that people look at it instead. But I think it's so important for you to really know that there is a method to this madness. To know that when you are adding in the shadows, there is a proportion, or at least how much you need to add, so that it makes sense and it feels visually pleasing and not overwhelming for the viewer. Because at the end of the day, when you're creating loose florals, that effortless look is all about brushstrokes, which was stage 1. And then adding layers, all of this is really secondary. You're just enhancing. Basically, your flower already looks good, you're just adding a bit of clothes on it, right? Or a bit of makeup on it. So that's exactly what we are trying to achieve here. So you can see my painting is now fully dry, and I'm doing this wet on dry. So I'm just adding mostly at the edges. And I think one of the most common questions when it comes to stage 3 is that the painting looks flat. So in areas where you feel it looks flat like this is what I like to do. I'm going to wash off my paint, and I'm going to create a gradient on it by adding water. I'm pre-wetting the surface. I'm going to do wet on wet again over this area. And you know, I challenge you to overlap with parts of the flower that is outside and then charge in color. And sometimes, super fun, to charge in a different color or mix it in together with your existing orange, right? I'm adding in a bit of pink and I'm adding in a bit of orange, as you can see on my palette. This pink from here and this, and I'm just going to charge it. And right there, what happens is that you are creating your gradient. You are unflattening it, basically. And with that gradient, don't be afraid to add dots to your painting. It's just going to move and diffuse, and I feel like it gives the painting some texture, especially since we're using cold press paper. And right there, you can see that it has kind of made that area a lot less flat. Okay? So when I glazed over pink over this orange, I'm just loving this coral color that has come about. I'm just going to experiment with adding a bit more pink to the edges, just a little bit. And you know, I'm noticing that one thing is missing from my florals, and that is a blue somewhere. So I'm just going to inject in a little bit of blue somewhere as well. But you see, let's move into stage 4 now. And that's really about how you use color and composition. And earlier on, I had this conversation where we were doing layers, and then I started to say, oh, I feel like this composition is missing color. So you can see that your head starts to think about, should I add a color? Should I do something more? And these questions are good questions because it helps you to navigate what's next. So I'm going to start to think or plan where I should add my blue. And whenever you have a composition like this, you want to create color harmony. And at stage 4, what we want to do is we are trying to, this time, think about how we can use intentional color to bridge one color to the next in our composition so that it stays pleasing and it's not random. Okay, so with my blue, yes, this is a very beautiful blue, but I'm going to add a little bit of my pink or my orange to it so we get a bit of harmony right there. Now let's see where I want to add it, and I'm just checking out the reference just to see what exactly we are missing in terms of the flowers that we've been following. And as you can see, some of the flowers are here and then some of them are everywhere. I'm not following the reference exactly. I'm just picking and choosing flowers that I think might go with the composition. So I am thinking about something around here. And I'm strategically adding the blue here in a place that is a little bit further away. And also, I am trying to showcase a little bit of distance from here, because we were talking about balancing our foreground and our background, right? So here is where, because this guy is so far away, we don't have to add in too much details. In fact, it's almost like a hint of some kind of side-facing flower, and we can always go back in later, add in a slighter light blue. So we're pulling it in. And this is the fun thing. Literally, the hard-edged blue flower here next to the purple flower here creates a contrast, and it's kind of nice in a composition where there's contrast. Now, if the blue is here, we need to scatter it somewhere else so that it doesn't look like an isolated blue that just decided to appear. So at stage 4, we also want to think about how we can inject in the same color elsewhere. And I decided that I wanted to put it here, close to the orange. And I'm just going to create something that is just mostly marks. It's a bit smaller and also does not carry so much detail. You can see at stage 4, the artist is also able to know how to discount details when looking at a reference. You start to think about what petals you want to paint and what you don't. Which is why I talked about how sometimes it's going beyond just following steps. And you see, when we are following tutorials on YouTube, a lot of these artists are absolute wizards or already at stage 4, or curators, right? And stage 4, I realized that I did not mention each of the stage names. But at stage 2, we were calling it the Wanderer, because they're still wandering around and kind of figuring out their place in watercolor land and also figuring out how things work. And they're also wandering through, all the different steps and things that are needed. Stage 3 is called the Traveler, just because they have already set a destination and they kind of know what they want to focus on, which could be Loose Florals if you're here today. And at stage 4, it's the Curator, because they are curating the types of techniques that they want to focus on. They're also curating a style or a type of method of painting, okay? And you would find that, when you're looking at their painting, there's always this signature or specific look to it. So I'm just wetting parts of my painting here, up here right now. Because while I'm in stage 4, I talked about being able to bring your composition together so that it does not look messy and random. You want to really get something that is a little bit more cohesive. So here is where I have just put some soft marks there, suggesting a soft blue flower that is hanging out at the back there. And have your paper towel handy, because that's really your water control friend. So now we've got a few different shapes, but they're also not recognizable. But you know that they are flowers because that's what we're painting. So we're going to go back in to some of them and add in some layers. So how's everyone doing so far? We are now 40 minutes into our live session. As you can see, I'm just taking my time through this, working with you. And while you are watching me paint, feel free to also remember to check in on how your painting looks in front of you instead of what's happening on the screen, because that can feel really hard. And I've been using my large round brush so far. I've not changed my brush. Okay. Oh, fun. Here is still wet from this area that I put down. And I can kind of put in some wet blends here, which is super fun. Now I'm going to be changing my brush very soon. And I'm still working with a large brush because I believe that when you work with a large brush, you will make larger marks and you also don't fuss with the details too much. And that's exactly what we don't want today. We want to really pay attention to the big shapes. Now at stage 4, one of the skills that you're also going to develop is your ability to use things like negative space. You're going to be using leading lines to move the eye through the composition. You're going to start to plan your painting a bit better so it feels a bit more balanced and less random, so it doesn't feel as messy.
Well, Jillian, just going back up to the chat, we've got let's see, Rachel or Rochelle. I'm sorry, I don't know which one, how to pronounce it, but she said she's 3 or 4, stage 3 or 4. And Gazella is stage 2. Jen is a traveler. Hillary, she thinks she's a stage 4, but she did some landscape. In landscape, she's a stage 4 and probably stage 1 in loose florals. Michelle is a traveler. So just wanted to make sure that we went over those.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I love that you guys are sharing about what stage you guys are at, because then it's a lot easier for you to focus on the skills that are at your stage. And I guess it gives you some sense of assurance too, that you don't have to do all the things, right? And it's a little bit like having a kid. And if we think that they need to do all the things, can you imagine moms getting 1-year-olds to learn to read? Then it's like, doesn't make sense. But when you kind of know exactly what your plan is, when things should happen, and it's not really a time span for watercolor, this really depends on how much time and how you practice. Because the way you practice is going to kind of determine how you start to see your paintings. And
That
that's
wasn't
why,
I'm sorry.
sorry.
That wasn't everybody, so that was just a few highlights, so sorry if I missed you. So, okay. I will mute myself now.
Yeah, but that's why I think one of the things that I want you to focus on is to apply your techniques. The more you apply, the better you get to know how to use the medium. And I think that also will eventually help you to make more creative decisions on your own. You see, if say for example, you learned music and someone has always been giving you the music notes, it's going to be hard for you to create your own songs or your own tune just because you don't really know how to create the notes that come together. So that's also something for you to think about. And it's the same with like being able to play around with your recipes. If we're always following a recipe book, then we won't be able to know how to create your own recipes. And I think that's so important, because if you know how that spice tastes, or then you know estimate like what or how much to put in, and it's going to be so much more empowering for yourself as a chef, instead of having to always rely on measurements that are coming from someone else. And I think, well, if you guys cook, you would know that cooking also takes practice. There's also the element of timing and all of those different things. So it's almost like they've got their own artist stage thing going on. So as you can see what I'm doing, I'm slowly building up the painting, and we're at stage 4 now. We're kind of like figuring out the space. I'm adding layers, but I'm not trying to overwhelm it as well. I want to keep it clean. I want to also remind myself that I don't have to add layers to all of the flowers. You see, because what we have here is we've got flowers that are more front and center, and those are the ones who are going to get more attention. And then the ones that are further around the back, where it's blurry, we don't want to give them too much attention. They're just going to be basically our co-stars. So I'm just going to be pulling out some green. This is a convenience green that I'm using. So it's not a mixed green, but I really like it, and I'm adding in just a little bit of yellow to it. This is Undersea Green by Daniel Smith. That's one of my favorite convenience greens that I use. Otherwise, it's Perlene Green, also from Daniel Smith. These two colors are so beautiful. So I hope that you guys are doing okay. I'm just pulling out some leading lines. I'm adding in depths of green here and there. I'm looking at the spaces where I need to go to add in leading lines and where exactly I want to highlight or showcase some negative painting. Take your time to move your brush around, and we are still working at stage 4, kind of thinking about the space, the composition, the leading lines, and working to develop the background and the foreground of this painting. Now, one of the things that I like to do is every time I do my lines, I'll always make sure that it's curved. It is going to give your painting so much more movement, and it feels a lot more organic also than if it's going to be just straight. So that's something that you can play around with. Now I noticed that there is a straggler here, and I'm going to add another straggler here. So then you play around with that composition a little bit. So how are we doing in stage 4 right now? And for some of us, if you feel like this is a lot and you're not ready, I want you to take a step back and just focus on the stage that you are at. This is exactly why this roadmap exists. It's for you to take your time through each stage and then not rush through to the next one or skip stages, right? And the fun thing is that before I developed this stage, my first watercolor workshop that was done online. Okay, so the first time I did an online workshop, I wanted to do something really simple and easy. And I thought, okay, what can I teach, right? And I thought, okay, let's start with the beginners. And that's how I started doing No Formula Florals 1.0. And with no fancy camera and just like a ring light and my phone, I just did a Zoom session, and No Formula Florals has been one of the favorites for beginners for a very, very long time because it does not only go through brush strokes. I mean, it talks about like movement together with your body, and brush strokes is really about expression. It's not just about going through the motion or how do you press and release and things like that. You want to feel the brush move through the painting, because a stage 5 wizard who paints with their brush will know how to give movement to their brushstroke. They will not be having dabbing marks. It's going to be a lot more lively. So that's something that I started with. And then after that, I thought, okay, what's the next thing that people would need? And that's what brought me to water control. And interestingly, as I started to release just these single workshops, focusing on one skill at a time, little did I know I was actually building the artist passage. Which is very fun to see because our members of Brush Movement now get access to all of this, and they basically are not only getting access to the individual workshops, but I've now pegged them in a 60-day skill builder so that they actually get to practice the skills So it's not just knowing how exactly it works and what to do, but you also get to practice and see how it's applied in a real painting. And of course, the more you practice it and the more you do it, you're going to develop an eye and you're going to become a little bit more intentional. And the fun thing is that I have actually been thinking about how we want to develop members' ability to really get accountable. So one of the things that I'm going to do after this retreat is to work on accountability buddies between members. So then that way, if you guys are focused on like brushstrokes, then you guys can be brushstroke buddies, and it's going to be a lot more fun, I think. So now we're about 50 minutes into our session and we're still developing the painting. As you can see, I'm just taking my time, going through it, and just adding layers where I feel I need, but not too much. Okay? Now that I feel like I'm pretty happy with where this is looking so far, let's look into stage 5, which is the wizard. And at stage 5, the wizard is someone who basically knows all the different techniques. You know, they know the glazing, the layers and everything. But one of the things that keeps them stuck tends to be that the wizards wants to feel safe. So they stay in predictable brushstrokes, predictable colors, and they have problems pushing past that comfort zone. So here is where I often like to think about adding in accent colors. I want you to start to think about things that you really, really like. And I am just going to be pulling out some neon paints, which funny enough, like I always felt like these neon paints are so fun to inject in my painting, not on its own, but as a glaze. So I'm just getting my favorite, this is like a pink red, and I'm going to glaze over parts of the flower. And I'm actually thinking of glazing over this pink and this orange here. So earlier on, we had added in some of that, right? And then here feels a little bit flat. So let's liven it up a little bit. So you can see that neon has appeared. And if you feel like it's too much, wet it, bring it down, glaze it. And here you're injecting in a little bit more spice into your painting. And my painting is fully dry at this stage. So when you glaze this over the orange, it's going to turn out a bit different if I glaze over this one here, which is a bit more of a purple. And here, when I added in that glaze, it doesn't have to be really thick. It's okay if it's just a little bit. But you can see I'm just using big broad strokes to go over those areas. I'm not going over and over again. You don't want to do that because it's going to create a lot of disruption to the cotton paper. And then as a result, you're going to get some overworked parts. So now we're kind of playing the role of stage 5, which is our wizard. I'm actually curious to see what's going to happen if I injected in blue into here a little bit while it's still wet. Don't be afraid to experiment. I think experimentation, which really comes from the curious stage, is such a crucial skill because that's what keeps your art alive, and it's also what keeps your art fun, and that you are keen to keep exploring. I'm going to push the orange on this guy a little bit so that it doesn't look so washed out. How's everyone doing so far? Because I am soon calling brush down on this painting, and we are just nice going to be reaching 10 o'clock. And if you want to develop the background further, wet areas in your painting that you want to add some soft edges, I recently started playing with the spray bottle, and that's super fun. I don't know if you've seen it, but I've done it in a couple of our art socials, and I was like, discovery. And the nice thing about taking that risk of just spraying down your your painting while it's still wet, is that parts of the pigments that are wet is going to move around. And then there is a bit of that unpredictability, which is super nice.
I've been working with the Yupo paper, which is like a plastic paper, and it's really different. So I've been experimenting with that. So it's really cool. It's a different beast though.
So I love that you experiment with new supplies too, because that's definitely going to be, it's going to add fun to your painting. And another thing at the wizard stage, or at least at stage 4, the curator, is also the ability to think about color, relationships, how things go together. We're not going to focus so much on just picking our favorite colors anymore. And of course, picking your favorite color is important, which was what I did with the accent. But, like thinking about space here, like for example, here is a negative space. And it's very easy for us to think, oh, I'm going to fill it up. But instead of filling it up, what if we left it open? And it kind of adds into the composition, the space, instead of having to fill everything up all the time. Now I've changed my brush over to a smaller brush, and I am just going to be injecting in some lines. And the reason why I've switched to a smaller brush, because I want those nice, crisp, thin lines scattered around this painting. And that's how you get those nice detail. So I hope you get to see how the artist passage was applied throughout this painting from different stages, and where you need to focus on depending on what stage you are at. And if you have not checked out the artist passage, I highly recommend it. And in a while you guys are painting, I'm just going to show you a couple of examples of how different ways you can practice at each stage, so that it makes it a little bit more tangible, and also for you to see for yourself a little bit more concrete if you think about it. So you can see for yourself, okay, I'm at this stage, this is what I should be working on, or this is how I can focus my painting direction a little bit more. Now, the reason why we are doing our Brush and Bloom retreat, and I often like to call it a retreat instead of a challenge, is that I always feel like a challenge has that connotation or pressure that we all need to keep up to something, and it's a checklist. And if you have not even started any of the days, I just want you to focus on today's live session and just have a couple of things that you can take away. I think that's so much more important. Focusing on what you need instead of what you need to do. So it really changes your perspective and mindset around needing to always finish, do, and it goes without the intention. So I'm calling my painting done. And I just want to do a review with you guys. How you guys doing? Maybe put down for me an emoticon or something. And one of the things that we've been working on in brush movement also is composition. So we've been talking about different types of composition, radiating composition. We talked about different shapes that you can use. And then we also are going to be releasing module 2, which I'm going to be talking about the hierarchy of effects. So you really get a sense of which effect is important for your composition to really stand out. Because it's not just everything is not equal in that sense, and you would learn that brush strokes is going to be like one of your main things. So tell me how you guys are doing. And my brush movement members know me better than I know myself, but it's hard to call brush down, and I always do this. Always. Just one more stroke. Yeah, so for those of you guys who have painted along, can you let me know in the chat, like I've been painting along, or where you are at? But in the meantime, I just want to show you how a class looks like at different stages so that you actually meet yourself where you are in your stage. And for Brush and Bloom, the way in which I've designed the classes, or at least each day, was intentionally for each stage of the artist passage. This was stage 1 because we focused just purely on brushstrokes, which is day 1. And then day 2, we did water control and wet in wet, right? And then day 3, we're going to do a composition, but I don't want to show you the composition because you can go and see it on day 3. I don't want to spoil the surprise, but I want to share with you that at stage 4, this will be the next stage, which we did in a class called Cosmo Confettis. And basically, you can see all of these are Cosmo flowers. But at stage 4, I wanted to focus a bit more on painting white cosmos. And not only that, we also did a class on this where we took all of the different elements around color to create different variations. Some of that was wet on wet, some of it's using complementary colors, so you're kind of pushing your limit a little bit. And then at the wizard stage, we get really technical. Oh my gosh. We play with a limited color palette. So each month, this is how I get artists to really apply their skills, because I feel like application is going to help you to paint anything. It's not just going to be one flower, but you'll be able to paint many flowers the moment you learn how to apply the skills across different things. And of course, these were with a reference photo. There was no sketch that was done, but we did with brush strokes, and then after that we did negative painting. If I look at it, I can name you all the different things that we were applying in here. And then also, using just a limited color palette to help you to paint different florals. Now, this is another class, one of my favorite classes. It's really hard because every time I talk to my brush movement members, I cannot find a favorite class. But this here was pressed flowers, and I thought I wanted to share with you because you see, at stage 1, I just wanted artists to know how to get nice, even brush strokes and then charge in paint. So they're basically doing a little bit of wet in dry and wet in wet. And also it transitions them into stage 2, where we're going to do a bit more wet in wet. So you're going to be doing a little bit more charging, and the layering sets them up for stage 3, where they are doing a lot more of a composition. And then stage 4 and 5 is where they do full-on pressed flowers. So I hope that you get to see how the classes, how sometimes we are at this stage, but then we hope to get to this stage because the YouTube thumbnail is this one. So then it becomes really intimidating, or we feel like, oh, we're not really doing it at that stage that we are at. And this is just one class, And this is pressed flowers, a really, really fun one. Another popular favorite amongst my brush movement members is mark making ditsies. And stage 1, making marks. Stage 2, wet in wet. Stage 3, monochrome. Stage 4, negative painting. And stage 5, putting everything together, mixing all the techniques. Basically, you can see the wet in dry, the negative painting, the wet in wet, everything all coming together. So as you can see, members actually get to decide for themselves what stage they want to focus on. I've also grouped all of the classes in playlists where you can only solely do stage 1 classes if you like. And I just want to give you some examples where in stage 1 we focus on a lot of the brush strokes kind of classes. We've got this one where we got expressive with leaves, and then we did warm-up exercises and also figuring out how to use more than just the round brush, the flat brush, the filbert brush, and the cat's tongue brush. So I think it's so important that at stage 1, while being curious, you're also exploring different brush shapes, right? And then at stage 2, with the classes that are focused on wet in wet, you'll find things like these, where it's really about paint and water ratio. I think another one like this is another favorite. Oh, it's so hard. I had members go like, do you paint any landscapes, floral landscapes? Because they've seen it on my Instagram grid before. And I created this one, which was for stage 1, and this one for stage 2. And the big difference between these two is this one is just wet and dry, and this one is with wet and wet, which is why you see all the diffusion and all that. And we are really focusing on timing, paint and water ratio, and consistency. And then if we were to move on with this one, we look at stage 3 and we create a composition, which is a mix of your stage 1 and 2 with wet and dry and also wet and wet. So I hope that you get to see how exactly you can practice. And let me just share with you a little bit about stage 3 as well, because one of the things that I like to break down is to break down single flowers. So instead of creating a composition like this, you can break it down into individual flowers, and then after you've studied them, put them into a bouquet like this on your own. So this one here is, it was basically a follow-up from last year's retreat as well, which is really, really fun. And apart from that, when we get to stage 4 and 5, here is where you paint things like these, where it gets a little bit more abstract. This is this month's class. No, not this month's class. Last month's class. Yeah, last month's class, where we did waves of white. So I basically showed members all the different ways that you can create white flowers. And this one was just using negative space. So we played with negative space, we played with complementary colors, so all the different ways of painting white. And this one is in stage 4 and 5. This is this month's class at the wizard stage, which we are painting basically peonies. And one of the things that members always ask me is, how do we paint the shadows? How do we know where to paint the shadows? So then I created a class called Shady Beauties, and all of it is really just focused on painting shadow shapes. So I hope that this gives you a sense of how to think about the stage you're at, what you need to focus on. And then, this is also going to give you so much more purpose and intention with your painting, so that when you focus on that skill, it's going to be a lot easier for you to move on. Whether you're planning to be a musician where you're going to create own notes, or you are going to continue to follow whatever everyone else is doing. But that said, I also have to preempt to you that depending on the stage you are at in your artist passage, being in stage 1 and 2, it is quite essential for you to also still be following tutorials. But I always encourage you to focus on trying to adapt what you learn and put it into your own practice so that you keep learning how to make decisions. And then that way, you're going to be a lot less reliant on steps and you're going to start to listen to yourself a lot more. So Hillary says, I'm just going to be looking at the chat right now and any questions about my painting so far. Of course, you guys will get access to this as a replay. I'm actually pretty happy that I managed to do this under an hour because sometimes I take a long time to do my paintings. But there is a lot of different skills to learn. And as I mentioned, right, like after I did a workshop on From Blobs to Blooms, the next workshop that I did was From Flat to Fabulous, which I love, love, love. It's one of my favorite workshops. And the interesting thing about that workshop is it was the first time I got a camera. So I decided, oh, I'm going to pre-record sections. And people really liked that I had done a pre-recording and then we came on live and we went through the skills and we learned to apply. And that's when I also discovered that, okay, I can't just give skills. I need to do a live session to do application, which is exactly what we're doing today in our live session, which is so important. So if you have been following along, I would love to see your paintings, put it up on Facebook, or you can tag me on Instagram, wherever you are hanging out at, because I know some of you are not on Facebook, but you managed to get this link through our emails. And speaking of that third class, the next class that I did was a monster class called The Art of Color. That class is, oh my gosh, I have to tell you about it because I told myself I'm just going to do a simple class on color mixing. And the more I learned about color, it was one of those moments where the more you know, the more you don't know, because there's so much about color, there's so much nuances, and I broke it down and I managed to release 40 modules in 6 months. But anyway, it's insane. But that class is so practical because it also teaches you. Let me show you a couple of things that we did. It shows you how to apply color in a composition, and we are painting with limited color palettes here, so that way you get more familiar with how color combinations work, and we stop painting them in separate colors and brackets. Oh, somebody noticed the cute portrait of me. Yeah, that one's drawn by my husband, supposed to be of my daughter, but ends up looking like me. So funny enough, before it was another photo that was in another live session. But yeah, so the art of color is like the next thing. And as I was building up these workshops, one of the things that I was actually building up was the artist passage. I just didn't realize it because I just realized that it does take a certain level of maturity to really get into color because it's so overwhelming, just because of all the different technical jargon and all of that thing. And it goes beyond the color wheel. And I think that's why till now, ever since I did the art of color, I've been using this ceramic palette. I've been using a 13 color palette for at least a year and a half now. And all I do is I top up different brands, but it's always that same 13 color. I have done an Instagram live about choosing your color palette before, and I will probably drop it in the Facebook group so that way you get access to that and you can actually check it out. Especially if you're wondering what kind of colors are essential in your palette, because there is going to be a difference in the types of colors you choose for mixing color. Okay, so it's really about creating clear colors and things like that. And right now, Brush Movement Collective is working on the art of composition. So composition is going to be another beast. I'm just looking around at where my art of composition paintings at. This is the art of composition. After I started pre-recording, it's a monster because once I start pre-recording, one of the things that I noticed is that you overthink. You really overthink. But anyway, we did this as a live session. My first art of composition live session. And it was a side-by-side comparison where we started with this, and then I showed members how to make it better. So it's just talking about tweaking it. We're talking about proportions. We're talking about like how to use the Fibonacci sequence and all of this in practice. And coming in March, this is going to be coming because like we're doing a lot more side-by-side comparisons. This one's on leading lines, if I'm not wrong. No, this one's on details. This one's on edges. And then color temperature. And then layers and details. Contrast. Saturation. And leading lines. So as you can see, I'm a very, very nerdy watercolor artist. I believe strongly when I say there is no other collective that is as thorough with making sure you're covered with all the different skills that you need to know about watercolor here. And I aim for it to be a one-stop hub. So by the time it gets to the end of the art of composition, this is where, like, I wouldn't say I've done my job, but I think this is where the Q&A sessions really keep coming in, and it's always the one that inspires me for new workshops and things like that. I mean, No Formula Florals has season 1, season 2, and season 3 already, and they're not on brushstrokes anymore, but they're on floral perspectives, and they are on how to paint with a reference photo, because all of this is the No Formula Florals season range. So I'm hoping that you get a sense of what you need to build up. And I think this is also how I use the 5 stages to not just map out the monthly floral classes, but to also give you the skills to focus on what's needed. So I am just going to take a look at the comments. Please feel free to go in the chat, ask me questions right now. And if we have time, we can go through it. Otherwise, tomorrow we're going to have another live session, and this time the live session is going to focus on troubleshooting. So feel free to drop your questions, and there is no such thing as bad questions. There are all kinds of questions, and I want you to put them down because sometimes I don't even think about it. Or if you're not sure about a question, maybe you want to put up your art and you want to go like, tell me what's going on, like how can I, and it could be a recent painting. It doesn't have to be a painting from the retreat. So you really get a sense of what you can do next time to improve your painting, because I feel like each time we reflect on each piece of work, you're going to get more and more familiar with understanding what you can do to improve next time, which is that 1%. So Hillary says, I'm following okay, the painting's a little stiff and not know what next step is going to be. There is some positioning mismatch. Overall, I'm happy with it and I will practice more. So I'm happy to hear that, Hillary, because to be honest, like when you are really studying the things that work and the things that didn't, you really start to recognize what exactly you need to do next. Now, I think another misconception about the artist passage I need to bring up is that while the artist passage does tell members what is the next step and what to focus on, it also talks about celebrating milestones. Because we cannot keep thinking about what we're not good at and what we need to improve. We need to focus on the stuff that are working. And it was very interesting because just the other day, I follow so many parenting Instagram accounts, but they're all appearing. I hardly see art accounts on my Instagram anymore. But there was a quote that said, if my child is good at basketball and weak at math, I will get him a basketball coach. Which made me think like most people would get the maths tutor, right? Which, well, maths is important. I highly think maths is important, but we're also talking about the mindset of strengthening what we are really good at. Because learning comes from passion as well. And learning comes from knowing what you're good at. And I think that's so important. So the artist passage is also about celebrating your milestones. the things you're already good at. And I think sometimes we forget that we are already able to do these things and we keep focusing on the stuff that we can't do, which I think is not healthy for us in the long run. So I am just going down the chat now so that you guys can go and enjoy your adrenaline rush from today's session as I enjoy mine. It's so lovely to see all of you painting here with me today. Nicole says, I've never seen a more thought out program because it's more than just the skills. Yeah, I mean, like, I think one of the things that I wanted to focus on also is the mindset, right, behind painting. I do not want to see your perfect pieces of art. And I'm wondering if at the retreat, no one is posting, or well, people are posting. It's coming, it's slowly coming. But my worry is that people are waiting for that perfect piece and it's not going to be perfect. I think show up messy, show up with the ring light and the iPhone and film your first class. You know, don't find the perfect camera and setup and all this, because this didn't happen, or at least whatever I have behind me didn't happen until I don't know, a year ago. So it definitely is important too. So Hillary says, I've not been able to get into Instagram, would like to. I'm a member of Brush Movement, so how can I get access? So I will definitely keep in touch with you, Hillary, and message you. And yeah, that's it. Thank you so much, guys, for coming for this session. Before I go, I am going to ask if there is any. I just want to take a look at your paintings. I just want to take a look to see. I'm going to put it in gallery view so that we can see everyone's paintings. Let me see. I'm going to put gallery view now. Yes! So nice to see all your faces, not just mine. If you are happy or keen to share your painting, please feel free to share it. As you can see, the painting that I did is on a pretty large piece of paper. So that's also the number one thing. Make sure that you use big sheets of paper. The bigger, the better, preferably bigger than your face. Because that's when you use the big broad strokes. If you use a small piece of paper, you're going to do the small strokes. So Michelle, so nice to see your art. I am loving it. I love the softness. I know you're thinking, Jill, I don't know what's going on with that purple flower, but we're going to get there. Yeah. And then Giselle, oh my gosh, I love the layers and the color. You know, there's so much harmony I'm seeing in the painting. Dorothy, oh my, the neons. I'm loving that you added in some of those neon colors. And yeah, Rachel, oh wow, so much detail. You've added in your flair. Yeah. And Hillary too. Thank you so much for sharing all your work. I'm really so glad that you guys made time to join me. Thank you so much. And also thank you to Nicole for helping me to time check. One of those things, like I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not gonna like spend all night doing this, I'll never sleep. But thank you so much, and you'll get the replay shortly. Allow me some time to render and everything. You can post your artwork wherever you would like to see me see it. If you're a member, of course, Discord, and then we've got the Facebook group, and then you've got Instagram. There's so many channels. I am so glad to see your work, and I can't wait to see you guys tomorrow for our next live, because it's going to be just troubleshooting, Q&A, and if you've got no questions, I'm just going to pull questions out from my head, okay? Like, I'm just going to pull out most common questions from Brush Movement members, because there's so many that keep coming and repeating, so we're just going to do some of that. And yeah, and you know, just so you know also that Brush Movement Collective is going to open for enrollment first time this year. Very exciting. And it's not going to be until Monday. So Monday doors will officially open to let you guys have time to breathe in all of this amazing stuff happening. So yeah, thank you so much for being here, and good night, good morning, and good noon wherever you are at. Bye bye.